today discussing the cost of cybercrime. Let's give a warm welcome to Patricia Titus.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. So, good morning. As Larry likes to say, it's hard to make research data exciting, but I'm going to make a good attempt at it. My normal presentation mode is I like to wander around, but based on strict direction from Dr. Ponemon, I'm going to stand right up here at the podium, and I have a stack of papers. Honestly, I do. To make sure that I highlight the key areas from this research material. So just an early question, how many of you are actually CISOs or in the security divisions of your companies? Can I see a show of hands? Great. So as you know, research material is what we use every day to facilitate our leadership teams in our companies to ensure that we're getting the right funding and resources. And we need statistical data, benchmark data, often to be able to say, here's the so what in what I do. So the cost of the cybercrime study is very critical for us in the security field to ensure that we're clear on what we're asking for. So it's really an honor to be here. This is an exclusive look. This material is just being presented today for the first time, so you're getting a first look at it. So just a couple of things for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Ponemon Institute. We also do the cost of a data breach study, which is another great piece of research material. We do benchmarking. This particular analysis is based on a company. It is not based on an individual. So while we're doing our research, it doesn't force us to follow a fixed script. In other words, we're not going in and asking interview questions of the same questions and expecting different answers or the same answer. So what our study and research does is it allows us to be more nimble and flexible. So when we find an area that seems like we hadn't thought about it, it allows us to bring that data into the study as well. So just to be clear, this is not a scientific study. So we interviewed at each of the 58 companies, hundreds of people, multiple times about different subjects. So that's what this is. This was first conducted 6 years ago, so this is our 6th annual report. So getting a look at this benchmark, to be clear right now, everything is represented in US dollars. However, when we're doing the benchmarking, we're using local currency. So at the time of the study, the exchange rate could have impacted, where the dollar right now is fairly strong in Europe, it can impact the different costs because of the variation. It's very clear to make that point, especially for those of you who are supporting global corporations. You're going to see different dollar figures. So when you're presenting this material, or if you use this material, it's very important to keep the exchange rate as a point in time reference when you're looking at this particular data. So I want to talk about the average cost of cybercrime by an organizational size and industry, because I think that's relevant to us and how we fit into that scheme. So the ranges that we're using here are a maximum and a mean or a maximum and a minimum in order to deliver the right level in between. So this is an aggregate of 5 of the 6 years. What you'll see on subsequent pages is an average of the 6 years and a comparison against 2015 to show you the variance between what the average was over the course of the last 6 years versus what's now happening in 2015. The analysis is based on the mean cost for cybercrime year over year. It's really hard to make this interesting. I hope y'all don't fall asleep. All right, so in this particular slide is very important because you would not want to see a straight flat line. What you're looking at is, this does look like an EKG strip for some of us. That's what mine would look like if I were in the dental chair versus the doctor's office. You don't expect to see a flat line though, because you want variety. So the variety of the companies from the 1 to 58 shows the average cost. Some companies are spending more, or there's a higher cost of cybercrime than there are for others. And we're going to get into what those factors are that are causing these static numbers based on the size of the company and based on the seats, which is another indicator that we used for this particular research study. So what this particular slide is showing us that the data creates a range of confidence, and the more precise we get, we see the predictions grow. So the closer we get to that medium line in the center, we get more precise on our precisions. The precision interval is the methodology that we're using in this particular research study. So what we did here, if you focus on the dotted line, you'll see that there's an increased cost of cybersecurity. It's increasing with the size of the company. So the bigger the company, the more money that's being spent. And in this particular study, we actually use seats versus head count or revenue. And we feel that there's a big difference in versus headcount versus the number of seats in a company. And you might have the number of seats taking into consideration contractors or consultants or others that are participating in your company that have access to your data versus the headcount of a company or the revenue of a company. What this is showing is the smallest sized companies are on the left side of the chart, and being the smallest size of enterprise seats, to the right side where you have more enterprise seats. And this particular slide is only showing 2015 data. So what you're seeing is the more seats there are, the more the cost is increasing. I don't think that surprises anyone, right? For this slide, we divided the sample in from low to high. So we'd expect to see the values retain the same patterns, right? So more seats, quartile 4, less seats, quartile 1. Again, it's substantiating the larger the organization, the larger the cost. Now, if we look at the annualized cost per seat in ascending order, you're looking at the total cost per seat, you'll see an inverse. So instead of looking at the size of the company, you're looking at the individual seat costs. And that individual seat cost is more. So your smaller companies, because you have less investment, you have a higher cost of cybercrime. The larger the company, the more it's spread across more seats. So your cost is driving down. So what that's really telling you is the smaller companies are incurring a higher cost of cybercrime than you are in a larger company. The cost mix of attacks by the size of the organization. So on the blue are the larger companies. On the, well, pink, whatever color that is, those are the smaller companies. Now, we've broken out a couple of things here. So one might say, well, malware, you've got malicious code, they're the same things. And we're looking at malware more of an APT or weaponized malicious code. Malicious code can be part of malware, but it's more of where it's injected. The blue side, again, are the larger, red side the smaller. The cost mix is telling us that based on the type of attack, the impact is smaller. So you'll see that they're running pretty much the same till you get down to malware, where things start to level out and reverse. Does that make sense? All right. Looking at it based on sector, I don't think this is any surprise. You're seeing the more regulated. The red line is now an average of the 6 years. This is where I said we'd flip over. The blue line is 2015 data. So what you're actually seeing based on the sectors is financial services has the largest annualized cost. What's interesting, what we found interesting, is that healthcare, while it's increasing, we believe that that will have a much higher cost based on recent activity that's been started to be unearthed. data breaches being notification of data breaches that happened in arrears, and notification is just starting to happen. So next year we think that that number will increase much more dramatically. Although retail's doubled, it does show that the highly regulated institutions are still taking a bigger whooping, so to speak. And retail, because of the recent data breach regulations, we believe that's why we're seeing more of a spike in that area as well. Anything look unusual here? The whole thing looks unusual? I mean, this is, for me, this is like an extremely valuable slide to help me compare myself if I'm in financial services to the other sectors. The less regulated, the less occurrence, the less cost. So one would equate more heavily regulated, it's more expensive than if you're unregulated. I don't know that I would equate the same things quite the same, but you could surmise that. So the types of cyber attack influence the cost of the cyber crime. We wanted to make sure that we were clear in what was happening. From 2010, there were 50 types of attacks, and we sampled 46 organizations. The number increased. We had a little bit of an increase in 2013 of organizations that we used in the sampling, and they're different companies every year. Some will show up in a couple cases, some will show up multiple years, but we do not use the same sampling of companies every single year. I can't share that information, obviously. Actually, Larry won't tell me what it is. He's afraid I talk in my sleep. But in 2015, I think what's relevant here is you've seen about a 220% increase from 2010 in the number of attacks, with the sample size varying slightly. The type of attacks experienced by the 58 benchmark companies, obviously, number one, no surprise, Trojans and viruses. Malware is number two. Now remember, malware, again, is more on the phishing. It's cross-site, or it's more on the phishing side versus the, I'm confusing the two of them. Malware is not malicious code. It's more, the malicious code is more of the APT or the weaponized. And the web-based attacks are the cross-site scripting. It's the SQL injections. And then what's interesting, though, to me is that, is there a tornado? Oh. Wow, I love the weather alert systems. I was ready to hit the floor. I'm from Minnesota originally, so. The denial of service, to me, that's very interesting because that type of attack was not experienced as much as, say, some of what would be perceived as the easier things to catch through, worms and viruses and Trojans. One would think if I've got a good security technology deployment that catches that, or some non-signature based, I should be able to find those, yet every company was still hit with them. When we hear DDoS takes a pretty big seat, what's interesting is it runs neck and neck with stolen devices. So we want to talk about the percentage annualized cybercrime by attack type. Right, so I think this is a very interesting slide as you're looking at what technologies to deploy, how much human interaction you need to have to try to bring your folks up to speed on what's happening, because your employees are your front line of defense. And so when I start looking at the annual cost by attack type, there are some things that I can put into place using this material, this information, to ensure that I've covered as much of the gap as possible. We did see a bit of a decrease in the web-based attacks over the average 6 years, which is good. And then stolen device count went down. And we're not 100% sure what that could be from. It could be more companies are moving to BYOD, so you've got more people using their own devices to access data. There are several different reasons why those numbers might be changing. Denial of service, I think there's been a lot more innovation, more companies coming into the playing field of being able to help give DDoS protection. So companies are investing in that, seeing that it's a problem if they don't. The other thing that I think is interesting is that the 6-year average for botnet was higher than 2015 alone. So it looks like there's a decrease in the botnets from a percentage cost of how much it costs by attack type. The attack frequency. So what's the cost of a DDoS attack becomes more expensive versus stolen devices, right? So when you lose a device, it's cheaper to buy another one. They're a commodity item. Hopefully you've got encryption on that device, so when it's lost, it's not, you're not losing intellectual property. But it's that DDoS attack which is stopping your company from effectively functioning. And so by the attack frequency, how often is it happening? Part of that tells me if you're not getting the message after the first DDoS attack, you got a different problem. But, and then the other part of that equation in a DDoS attack, are they only attacking to take your eyes, you rush your resources to stop the DDoS attack while they're doing something else nefarious in your network that you're not seeing? And so a lot of times DDoS attacks become they're using those more frequently to keep us off guard from what's really taking place in the rest of the network. At least that's my opinion. So this is I find this slide very interesting. The total days to protect, we're looking at the time to contain the attack, not the time to find the attacker. Two very different. So showing from the left to the right, it's taking us more days to contain at a higher cost. Does that make sense? It's taking us more days to contain. The average days to resolve the attack based on the attack type. A very important data point is when we first started looking at the days to contain were 13 days in 2010. We are now looking at 46 days to contain. Last year it was 45, this year it's 46. And the cost of that is each day that your containment costs, that you're not able to contain, that cost is $43,000 per day. That's what you're losing if you're slow to contain, which talks about your incident response process, your technologies that you're using, the ability to see the attacker in the first place to get containment. Again, this is not to find the attacker, but to actually contain them. So we're going to do a little analysis of the cost components of cybercrime. So what's this all about? All right, so information loss means data being stolen. Business disruption is a disruption such as a DDoS attack. Revenue loss is just what it says. Other costs are the indirect things that you have to pay for. And then equipment damages. So this is probably one of the best studies for me, personally as a CISO, to be able to use to show my bosses this isn't all about data theft. There are other things that are happening that are affecting the business. So I now can say business disruption means loss of revenue. And we've had some equipment damages, but that cost is very minimal compared to the information loss, but it's not just all about information loss. The reason that data loss is so high is we believe that the increase in nation states, the increase in IP theft from insider threat and other nefarious actors in our networks, that's why we're seeing that the continued problem with information loss. very concerning that the business disruption is increasing based on the 6-year average, when we saw a decrease in DDoS. So that must mean there are other things that are happening that are also disrupting our business, such as, oh, I don't know, software glitch at an airline causes a huge business disruption. I don't know if any of you have ever gotten caught in any of those, but it's very frustrating. So if we look at the next one, the percentage cost by internal activity center. So there's a lot of money being spent in, a lot of time being spent in detection and recovery. It's probably the biggest single cost. In fact, the investigations are always, if you're a highly regulated institution, you don't normally have a choice. If you're not a regulated institution, you can decide how far to investigate before you find that diminishing return on investment. Your ex-post response, which are the, I like to call them the corporate knee-jerk reactions to an event, where we have to run out and do something, got to look busy, an event just happened, and then incident management, which is interesting that is not a higher percentage. It must mean that a lot of people have really good playbooks for incident response. The problem really falls into the detect and recover portion. The percentage activity cost by the 6 specific cost components. In other words, where am I spending my money? Direct labor, cash layout, productivity lost, overhead, indirect, and other. This one's pretty self-explanatory. So I like this one because it helps me argue that we're not putting enough money in the human layer. As a matter of fact, it's decreasing, which concerns me because education and awareness to me is one of the most critical factors of the success of a security program. So this is actually disturbing to me. We're seeing a decrease in the network layer, although it still has the most funding. We're starting to see a decrease. I can't even surmise why that is. We are seeing the app layer starting to see an increase. I would expect to see that now with more targeted application attacks. And we continue to, it's hard to say if the physical layer is getting the right level of attention or not, but I would say that without our borders have become so blurry with what is inside the company versus what's outside the company, our digital personas from our personal persona to our corporate persona have blended together so much that I don't know that the physical layer gets the same level of attention that it used to, nor perhaps that it should. Oops, get ahead of myself. There we go. Activity cost in comparison. Did I go the right way? Oh, yep, sorry. So what's interesting on this slide is the companies that have invested in security technologies, the cost is actually, if you don't invest in the intelligent technologies, you can expect to pay more during an event. So the red is the number of the companies that do not deploy security intelligence technologies, which for some of us might be mind-boggling, but there's a lot of reasons why companies don't. This is also a very, very helpful slide for those of us who are looking at what this data is telling us and where we could or should be investing. For some of us, it might be a checkbox that we have invested well in these types of capabilities and technologies. But this shows you of the 58 companies where they've spent their money. And some of us would say we should be investing more in the extensive use of data loss prevention. However, this is where those companies fell out. The cost savings when you deploy these technologies. This is another excellent slide to show management how much money you would save in an event or an attack. If you have security intelligence systems, this is the amount of money you save. Now, some would say, why is enterprise deployment of GRC tools up there on the list? I would venture to say it probably means you've done a good job of asset management. You know what's in your inventory. You figured out what data types you have. You're looking at your risk across the entire enterprise of technologies. But what's interesting, if you look at that compared to the previous slide, only 38% have deployed it. However, look at the cost savings that you get. There's a significant savings, $3.7 million, by having good technology deployments. It's not the only factor, obviously. So when you're estimating the ROI for 7 categories, it's very strange in security, and Larry wanted me to make this point very clear. When you're looking at IT technology like CRM, you can look at the trends based on the investment, right? And they're meaningful. But you don't have the same luxury in security. And the reason you don't is because of the changing landscape, the threat landscape, and how it morphs into a rapid amount. Yes?
Could you define security intelligence systems, or are you going to?
I think that security intelligence systems are in the report. It goes into more detail about what it means. So it would be your advanced malware, your non-signature based detection, SIM. It's the correlation of all the information. It could, to be honest with you, security intelligence systems could also be you're using a managed service provider in some instances. So I would ask that you access the data. It'll give you more detail. This is really a high-level overview, so be prepared for a long winter's read. It's good. I mean, it's good because you do have to be able to answer those questions for leadership. So we took the lowest ROI or the most conservative analysis when we did the ROI, but you can see there's a huge ROI for encryption and security intelligence systems. I don't want to be, I would say that encryption is great. It's not the panacea, so be careful that you don't overuse that. I've seen a lot of companies get themselves into a lot of trouble with encryption. And then there's that age-old conversation on the government wants all of our encryption keys and so that they can find the bad guys, and it's the conundrum of what do we encrypt versus what we don't. But there is a big return on investment for encryption. And we know that from systems that are stolen, disk drives that go missing. You might take a trust hit for a bit. You might take a little bit of a stock hit. But what you won't do is have that massive expenditure that you're going to have to notifying everybody that their data was lost versus their data was encrypted and was lost. Very different story, I think. So we're just whipping right through this, aren't we? Maybe we'll have time for fun. We can talk about some fun topics and how you take all this and use it. I think you're going to get some of that this afternoon. So the 7 enterprise security governance activities that are critical. Again, this should not be a big surprise, but I will tell you, being back in the marketplace again and looking for my next home as a CISO, I took a nice break. Enjoyed spending time with my 3rd grandchild. It's wonderful. We should have had grandkids before we had kids. Would have been great if I could have figured that out. But it's amazing how many companies do not have a high-level security leader. So they'll have people doing security stuff, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a titled CISO, but you have somebody that really is the central focal point at the right level in the company, at the right place at the table. It's still amazing to me that so many companies don't have it. So of 57% have it, There's still 43% that do not. Certifications against leading standards. So we're also finding that a lot of companies are very heavy into security certifications. They feel that that's important. A couple of the companies I worked for felt that it was important for a lot of the IT people to have security certifications. So it wasn't just information security people had a CISSP. It was people in IT had a CISSP. And I think that changes the culture in the company to be more adaptive. The formation of a senior level security council, I find that that is extremely effective of helping me get that message to the leadership team about what's happening. It doesn't, yes, it's great if you have access to the board, but in some companies, it's not. The companies are so huge, it's just not realistic based on the size of the corporation. But if you can have a senior advisory team that helps understand and bring their business problems to you so that when you're talking about we need to get better on keeping people from clicking on a link, they start to get the picture and help spread the message through their business units. It's very important to have the cross-sectional. I think it also helps me not think about, well, this is an IT problem, because security is not an IT problem, it's a business problem. We used to be able to say it was an IT problem, but we've gotten a lot smarter now and we realize that it is really a business problem. I think the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. What I do find, though, interesting here is that only 31% of the companies are using extensive security metrics, which means we have a lot of information that's not going to the right places in the company. And that information is very valuable to help change the trends within a company. So you've got to be able to visualize what you've got and take your security risks and equate it to the business proposition of the why. So the cost savings when you execute those 7, I think this is important. When you obtain sufficient budgeted resources, that's pretty obvious, but look at the amount of money that you save. So when you're talking to your bosses and you're saying, we need to invest in more headcount, my people are, putting in 18-hour days, 6 days a week, they're stressed out, we don't have the right level, and of course you've got to do a staffing plan and resource planning. But the cost savings is $2.7 million in an event. The employment of certified security staff, the appointment of a high-level, while it may be important to have a high-level security person, those two are more important, and that's to have certified staff and have sufficient budgeted resources. So you got to have the right number of people. You don't have to have a single high-level person. Isn't your number one, but there still is a significant savings. We talked a lot this morning. Some of us had been talking about the substantial training and awareness activities. There is a return on investment there. There is a cost savings when you have things in place. They may not be perfect, but even if you're getting to a few people, it's worth it. You do have to get to the point, though, where you find that diminishing return on investment, and you have to constantly change your education. It can't be the same PowerPoint presentation every year that I'm click, 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 click through. Thank you, I got a certificate. It's very important to test people. So we wanted to give you a breakout of the functional areas who participated in the interviews, because I think this is relevant, right? So we didn't just talk to IT and IT security people. We did try to talk to other people in the company to get a different perspective so that we could hear their side and knowledge. This is the sectors that participated. Financial services was the largest sector, and so forth. The distribution of the participating size based on seats. Remember I told you that we did this based on seats, not head count. And this will tell you, based on the seat size, how much, who is participating and at what percentage. These are all very important as you're looking at being able to take this material and translate it into something that's useful and meaningful for you and your organization. So this is Larry's favorite page. This is his warning label. This analysis, and there are certain contributors that can influence this data. Unmeasured factors could impact the data, and we're estimating costs. While there is a possibility that the contributors are very proud of the results, there are contributing factors that may have negative impacts. So information is always kept very secure. We could go back next year, change some of our interviewing slightly, which might skew the results some. So again, this is not a scientific study. This is a research analysis. This is where you will find the full report for those of you who are inquisitive, and you will have access to this after the conference as well. This will be posted up on SecureWorld's webpage. So I think we're just about at the end of, I don't know how I did that so perfectly, maybe because I practiced at 3 o'clock this morning when I couldn't sleep. So are there any burning questions that I can attempt to answer?
Yeah, hi, Leo Cronin. Any comment about the Verizon report and their try to quantify some of this as well? They came up with similar results, but a little bit different. Do you have any comments about that?
I think you'd have to look at their instrument and how they use it. So they look at it very differently, and they have access to slightly different data points than we do. So they're connected to the law enforcement agencies. This is talking to companies versus, and some of the companies may not have anything to do with the FBI. There are some companies that don't have to report. As we anticipate tighter regulation in the US requiring all companies report any data breach, that has not happened yet. So I believe Verizon and the FBI have different level access to intelligence data. This was really talking to the companies themselves, and variety of sizes, from the small to the large, regulated to unregulated. So a little bit of a different. But we are seeing that increase in the cost of cybercrime. Other questions?
Why was a cutoff at $1 million?
I'm sorry?
There was a cutoff for all the studies. Anything under $1 million from an incident was not included in this research. Do you know why that cutoff was chosen, and if that was a posted decision to say it was not statistically significant?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. I'd have to defer to the expert. I'd have to defer to Larry for that one. So the information may be in the research material. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's possible that when you look at the cost of a data breach, what becomes significant is when you hit a certain threshold in a company. Although reputational loss and some of the other things that you incur when there is a small data breach, if you're a small company with a lot of key information, that data breach could be significant to you. It could be a low dollar figure, but it could have significant impact on the trust for your company. It could actually wipe your company out. I think we've seen that happen a couple times. And we've seen some big companies take some major hits. But I think, I talked to Larry and I said, why isn't there a bigger stock price hit for some of these companies when there's a massive data breach? And he said, it's interesting how the finances of a company are impacted less. I had hoped that, when I looked at the Heartland data breach, that you'd see their stock price just go boom into the dumper. Target, same thing. Wouldn't you think that we would lose trust in? It's interesting. It might take a dip for a while, but these big corporations go back up. So it makes our job a little bit more difficult, I think.
Probably time for one more question.
I've never found CISOs to be shrinking violets.
Okay, if we have no more further questions, let's hear it for Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate you making the trip. Again, we appreciate you taking Larry's place in this case. And great information, great stuff.